I think we've had sort of two incredible days where we've seen, in many ways, I think quite a phantasmagoria of images and ideas and sort of constructs that have emerged through each of the sessions. And actually, Ana Maria Duran is going to moderate this roundtable discussion. But before we move to the roundtable discussion, I just want to put perhaps sort of, or synthesize, as impossible as it is, given sort of the broad scope of ideas that have emerged in the last 2 days, perhaps frame the roundtable discussion with two floating ideas that I think are extremely, if perhaps at moments at odds, also extremely complementary in the discussions that we've been having today. And I think that one perhaps more ephemeral construct that we've been hearing over and over and over again is this idea of a shift, and I think a very important shift that we need to have from heavy monofunctional infrastructures to more complex cells, to more sort of complex organizational systems that tend to be extremely ephemeral in nature and that can actually begin to accommodate physical as well as sort of social and economic pressures. And I think for me, the issue perhaps that I have with this sort of discourse of the ephemeral diagram is that I really don't know what it looks like. And I think, in a way, to sort of counterpoint that position, for me, one of the perhaps most significant presentations that we heard today was actually Martin. And in particular, the moment where he actually showed the gas station. Because for me, the gas station is the moment where infrastructure became part of a larger social, physical construct, right? It became when the network, where this abstract system became a physical dimension of the city. And of course, we can say the same about the larger sort of stations and sort of the more infrastructural work that he showed by Eladio Dieste. But as we actually move forward in the roundtable discussion, I think many other ideas will emerge. But I wonder if the discussion could, I think, possibly begin to frame sort of the more projective side of what IIRSA could allow us to enable us to imagine within this framework of the larger sort of set of networks that are extremely ephemeral and very difficult to ground. And I think the scales that are specific to architecture and to the discipline of architecture that can allow to bring, I think, those a dimensional and material quality to those networks, which are what then becomes space. So with that, we've actually invited we have two additional guests that have not presented today, but that have been patiently listening to all the presentations with the mission of sort of giving a brief summary and very pointed opinions of everything that they've heard today. One is Flavio Sánchez from Buenos Aires, and Felipe Mesa from Medellin. And maybe we'll begin with them speaking for maybe 5 to 10 minutes each, and then Ana Maria will continue moderating the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. Thank you very much. It's on? Hello? Yeah. Yeah, you're a very nice person. And of course, I'm not going to do what you ask me because it's really important to summarize what has happened since yesterday in 5 minutes. And yeah, it's really, I think it's going to go on during the discussion. And I think also it's not important that if I'm going to do that. What I like to point out is in this short intervention is after seeing all this conflict and all this interesting and very important point of view and description of what is going on in Latin American context is to understand where we as architects, urban designers, landscape designers are going to act. Where is our place here? What we are going to do? We are going to explain what is going to do this. We are going to map all these conflicts. We are going to understand and to make interesting, research, or we are going to have an active reaction, an action in this process. And I think this is the IIRSA is opening an opportunity for us. And I think this is what I like you invited me to come here, is because the SAP is the best way to find an opportunity to act and to react in the way from our own discipline. So I think this is what I would like to discuss during this roundtable, where we are going to act and how we are going to do that. And I like to point out because I read the IIRSA statements, and it's a very big one, and I push you, if you want to read it, you can download from internet. And there are a couple of statements and agreements and a lot of interesting things. And of course, you can read over there that IIRSA is going to be great because it's made by them. But there are two elements that I think can open a place where we can work. And it's, they say that one of the aims of the IIRSA is to develop access for integration and development. No, that is what you explain in the brief and in the brief of the event. But the other one is to develop economical sustainability, social and social, environmental, and political institutions also sustainability. So, but after seeing all this presentation, I think there is a dichotomical concept between them. So if we are going to create access for integration, for development, it looks like the urban, environmental, social, and political sustainability is not going to happen, because we saw that all this access is going to produce, in their own success, pollution, urban fragmentation, social fragmentation, marginalization, etc., etc. So in this dichotomical situation, I think we as architect, designer, and we can find our position in this IIRSA development. And this is, I think, it's our opportunity to be real, producing real actions and designers and researchers and documents that we should try to push from this huge and very interesting and very empowered network to be listened when the people take the decision. So this is maybe, well, I was the first, and so I like to open this discussion during this roundtable.
Couldn't agree more.
With this one. Well, for me, with my background as an architectural designer, a conventional architectural designer, all the theme about IIRSA is really an opportunity to rethink or reconceive the architectural projects also. And I understand that it's particularly efficient that this school have 3 blocks: the landscape, urbanism, and architecture. But of course, we all know that the connections and the subtle connections between one of each of these schools is maybe the most different, the most difficult situation in all of the schools. So I agree with a lot of lecturers when they understand the infrastructural projects and the urbanism projects and problems as agreements and disagreements. I think that that's an interesting point of view. And the architectural project as a pact, as a pact that is provisional, and the architectural project as an open configuration. And we can understand that from different points of view: geometrical points of view, social points of view, environmental points of view, and of course urbanism points of view. And when I see, or when we understand architecture as or that maybe the raw material of architecture, of the urbanism or landscape, is the material cycles. Felipe called it extraction urbanism, and maybe Santiago called it non-extraction urbanism. When you think about that cycle, the extraction, the modification of the situation of that particular place, and the transportation of the material, and the use of that materials, whatever they can be, I don't know, stone or gold or oil. All those materials configure the cities and transform the architectural projects, a window, a door, whatever, a wall. And I think that if we understand that architecture is also that situation, that forces passing through, we can maybe conceive a more opportune projects of architecture. And that's why I think that we can connect all the themes of IIRSA, or more than IIRSA, the themes that the people yesterday and today are presenting here. Another way to see this is not to think about the cycles, but to think about the controversies. That's another way to see this situation. For example, the theme or the case study that I wanted to present in this event was about the distance or the gap between a gap with more or less 57 kilometers localized between Panama and Colombia in the Pan American Highway. That's a gap with two national parks. One is in the Panama side and one is in the Colombian side. And in that point, there are also 3 indigenous communities, very important communities, big communities. And Panama gave them their own rights for the land. So they have their own land. They are like another countries and located in Panama. And in that place, we have also these big groups of ecologists from Panama and Colombia defending of course, the forest and the biodiversity is one of the big spots of diversity in the world, of course. And we have also, as Camilo said before, a problem of narco traffic and narcotics that, of course, is a raw material also. And that's why I see the position of Camilo. I agree completely with Camilo in that. We talk about that all the time. Colombia is not the problem. Colombia is a completely normal country. Maybe Colombia is the center of the world in all the good things and all the bad things happening in the same time. I understand the things in the opposite way. Colombia is the center of the world. We have narco traffic, we have hydroelectrics, we have... what happens if we legalize drugs tomorrow? Colombia is a big potency in, I don't know, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, I don't know. The whiskey was the same.
Then you won't have as much, maybe.
It's okay. But maybe we can do and use normally use as the coffee. The coffee is a tropical product, and maybe Colombia is more related with Thailand, Vietnam, Venezuela, Brazil. We are the tropical belt, and we can connect together. We can share a lot of things. So I think that if we think in cycles and in controversies, we can understand the architectural project, the landscape project, the urbanism project, and the infrastructural projects as a whole, and as a pertinent theme, and as a theme that convokes us today as a completely relevant thing.
Okay, I guess I'll take over now. I will take Flavio's comment regarding what's the role of the architect in this state of affairs, not just in South America, because this is not a South American issue. It's a global issue. Everything is interrelated, and you understand that deeply when you're in the midst of Manaus, for example, and you know that you're connected to a country like Sweden right there through the free trade zone. But beyond those, describing all those interconnections in the planet, the role of the architect is the key issue of SAP, of the South America project. And I did want to take the opportunity of your question to share with the audience a little bit the one thing that we haven't discussed, which is precisely this network. This seminar is really a way to trigger and lay down, in a way we wanted with Felipe to lay down a theoretical foundation for this kind of discussion that would look at the history of the South American territory, which has yet to be constructed. And that's where we started with the more historical interventions that would explain to us how this territory has come about in time. And we had some incredible insights from the first panel. And then little by little, we wanted to proceed I admit it, in a chronological order into the more projective case studies at the end, where we wanted to look at, for example, what you and Mason showed in terms of already thinking, well, this is IIRSA, there's a condition at the border, it's very physical, it's demanding a specific kind of response. As architects, how can we design this border condition? How can we rethink it? How can we reformulate it? Because that's where I do think we are key players and very conspicuously absent in the process of the integration of the infrastructure in our continent. I'll admit myself that I didn't learn about IIRSA until 2007, 7 years down into its existence. IIRSA was created in 2000, and thanks to the Sao Paulo architects, I have understood. My first reaction as an Ecuadorian, I was telling Angelo before, was when I heard about IIRSA in 2007 from the former Ministry of the Environment of Ecuador, who's one of our advisors in the network, Yolanda Cacabatze. I was completely shocked because I couldn't believe that a continental scale project had never been published in the main newspapers of my country. I had never read an article in a magazine. I had never read anything about it in any Latin American urbanism book. And of course, I've read a little fragment of what's available, but nevertheless, I was shocked that it was so invisible. So I started doing research on my own, and when I found out about it and read that it had been proposed by Enrique Cardoso, the former president of Brazil, in 2000, and that he had developed a project with experts from the Inter-American Development Bank, my reaction as an Ecuadorian who's in North and South America was, this is coming from Washington. We just assume everything comes from Washington, especially when it's a large-scale project. So you know why I assume that after seeing Santi's presentation. But then when I started digging into IIRSA, I realized this project was not coming from Washington. It was coming from Brazil, and I knew nothing about Brazil. I had been in Manaus when I was 17. I had been in Curitiba, which was a very lucky travel because I was amazed by that city when I was about 25. And then my connection with Brazil was really much weaker than my connection with the United States or Europe. So I'm very thankful to the Brazilian architects and to the brilliant presentations that they have all laid out, because one thing that has become very clear to me as an architect and as somebody interested in the planning of South America is that this project is not just Brazilian, it's Paulista. Enrique Cardoso is from Sao Paulo. You saw in Angelo Bucci's presentation the map of South America that the father of Paulo Mendes da Rocha had drawn. He grew up with this kind of influence of great continental movements. You saw in the presentation of Otávio, which was amazingly revealing how Brazilians have always had this impulse towards the interior and conquering the interior through highways. I think his presentation was very clear like that, and trying to get away from that colonial condition established by the relationships that are cross-Atlantic, looking towards the Pacific, trying to relate to the America and trying to cut through. And then even when you look, I'm doing a lot of research right now in the architecture of Sao Paulo, because when you look at the architecture of Sao Paulo, you will notice that there's an underlying diagram in most of it, which is the bridge. It's a highly infrastructural architecture. So they always have these like great structures being supported on piers, transversing these great spans, and there's something about the bridge and this infrastructural impulse already in their architecture, which relates back to what Martin was saying about the Este and how it already starts to configure an infrastructure that becomes a relationship with the ground and not an antagonism with the ground. And in the case of the Paulista architecture and the Paulista School of Planning, which was also unveiled to us by Alexander, we see that Brazilians think big, like the Americans. I do think that there's, just as the US had this impulse to go from Atlantic to Pacific and started cutting through with the Jeffersonian grid, which we don't have, the Brazilians have felt the impulse, and now even more so under the pressures of China and the China is, with the US, the main commercial partner of Brazil. Now that the economy is booming, they need to cut ports across to the Pacific. So this Brazilian impulse that was reflected in the Brasilia capital, I feel that has become a South American project. So it's simply the expansion of the Brazilian project.
But I think you need to open it to the panel.
Okay, sorry. It's just I'm just trying to summarize what has been.
Yeah.
What,
So I
what
think-
has
I
been
think-
very, very
yeah.
revealing for me personally, and then
But I think it might be. I think you're actually in an interesting point because I think in a way maybe we should actually open the or sort of move the panel with the first presenter and maybe begin to see what sort of how Graciela, for example, begins to tie back. I think a lot of the ideas that we've seen today. So, yes.
Thank you again. Graciela, where are you? Please come here.
Yeah.
No, well, it's a difficult situation ever because I'm devoted to history, but I am an architect. I'm talking to architects in general, and so it's not exactly the same point of view that I have. In other situations, when I talk to historians, I am an architect. So this is very difficult. And perhaps you, with Octavio, we manage the same difficulties. So this will be my point of view. I confess that while this conference was going on, I was waiting to see I don't know how to say, more material architect, more territorial artifacts, more things, more material things, or more projects perhaps, but more architectural thinking that could complement my ideas that are historical ideas or theoretical ideas, but I have not the ability of doing projects, only to see projects, to balance projects, to participate. I don't know if the word is this word is very Spanish translated, but you understand, in groups. In teams, that was ever a very extremely rich situation. But because of this, I began to think what happened with architecture, what happened that we can't say, and we can't think. Where is the architect? Planted and what is doing?
Because you interrupted me, sorry, I was taking too long. But the thing that I wanted to finish is that. Sorry, but
I'm going to interrupt you again.
To
No, just
clarify, because basically SAP, what it's trying to do precisely is to generate projects, because we have an issue. And what we wanted to do with this seminar is lay out the issue on the table. It's so complex just to lay it out. But the challenge now, because that's not where it ends, personally, that's not what we're interested in at all. The issue now is during these 2 years, that each one of the hubs that we're creating through the network
I understand.
is going to start projecting.
Of course.
Alternatives.
I mean, what is which is the word, the language, the word of the architect in this point. I know that architecture and also the arts in general are in a big crisis, and it's a big opportunity, as we know. So that's why I want to put this, not as because well, I have no answer. It's not to criticize, but to put over the table this kind of problems. At the same time, I think that if we are going to develop these issues, in some another reunions, another conference, we have to invite another persons, another specialists, deciding which are the principal issues. I put some issues here that we have to convoke. For example, engineers. I know that is difficult, but well, we only talk about Dieste. And Dieste, you know, that worked with a team of architects that live downstairs. No, they have the studio downstairs, and so they know each other were. It was a fluid communication. They were in dialogue, and I think Dieste and the architects were provide this situation. Demography, immigration. There is a special branch of sociology now studying this, and this is one of the topics that was put over the table, and we have to go in deep. Agricultural and natural sciences, biology in general, not to put this quite naive idea of ecology that we as citizens have. I'm not against this, I'm sympathetic with this, but I think we must move on. And there, I'm very classical architect in my mind, because I know that in Vitruvius' time and in Alberti's time and in Le Corbusier's times, the architects have to know a lot of things, not in deep, to coordinate everything and give birth to a new form. You know, that it's ever like this. And if we don't precise the points where we have to go deeper, I think that nobody would take us as seriously as we deserve. And one or two things more. I didn't say economists because they are not open-minded. If you find one really for me is but could be. But we are talking about this, and we are talking. This is the last thing about politics, and I know each one has his own view. His own. In South America, I will say, don't say anything to the authorities of the airports, but we are kind of leftish, intellectual persons. And we know well that we are looking, each one has his own perspective to see politics, but there is also a very complicated world. We have to understand more about this function. We only have as background for this conference the IIRSA projects that are, or the territorial projects of our countries. And we began to ask some questions, and we don't know very much about this or that. So to talk politics, we also have to go deeper. No, that's my idea. Of course, we can talk about this by mail. No, we can suggest a lot of things, but I go again to my initial idea of composition instead of project, or project. Could be project also. I think Brazilians project. Yeah. They make big projects like Le Corbusier and no? And the composition is a more humble way to see architecture, perhaps more particular, no? But can change, can put a lot of different things together and join them. You know that harmony is not concordance. Harmony comes from the las juntas, I don't know. how to
joints,
say it, the
affinities.
joints of the material. No? Join between countries, between infrastructures, material, etc., with a knowledge that the experience of the conference, the successive conference will give to us.
Very good.
Now,
Maybe-
I would like to pose a little challenge, because you may disagree with me, let me know, but one thing that I noticed talking about joining, linking, and where the resistances are being met, I think that the project Brazilian modern impulse of integration has found its greatest resistance in the Andes, especially in the Amazonian Andes. And that became very apparent to me when Camilo showed an image in which basically, even if it was still a diagram, but it was the projection of a barrier around the Amazon to protect it from the forces that are piercing through it. And on the other hand, when I looked at the historical diagrams coming from the Brazilian projects, it was more about actually reaching out and networking and drawing lines towards the infinite. I thought that was an incredibly interesting counterpoint. What do you think about that, Otavio?
No, the other.
Hello.
That one's very
Difficult to say. It's strange because I became like a Brazilian specialist because, of course, I'm Brazilian, but also because I spoke about Brazil and Brasilia and about modernity and our condemnation to modernity. And so this is like my, I'm condemned to talk about modernity, Brazilian modernity here at Harvard, at GSD. I don't know, Ana Maria. If you allow me, I would like not to make like a synthesis, but my impression about 2 days of discussions. I think maybe our most difficult and most important task, I think, is to widen our capacity to imagine scenarios and a certain future. And because, in a sense, I'm a little bit afraid that we are maybe too much concerned about preservation. I think this is very important. Of course, preservation is very, very important. But as architects, I don't think we can afford to forget our commitment with speculation. And so, in a sense, I think, and I'm in a sense responding to the things I heard these 2 days here. I think we are responding to the evil consequences of modernity, and so I think we are responding to our own dreams and goals, like Goya's, the dreams of the reason and the dreams of modernity, our will and desire towards modernity. But so I don't know, I think we are too much concerned about preservation. And as I said the other day, I think culture and ecology are very, very important. So I think, of course, we must keep in mind that we have to preserve nature, and we have to pay attention to identities and to local thinking and to local cultures and so on. But I think we must be able to imagine a contemporary subjectivity. And this is very, very important. And maybe this is a lesson from, for instance, the contemporary art debate, because artists, they are talking about contemporary subjectivity, and I think they are ahead of us. That's my feeling, ahead of us.
Now, following up on that, Mason, you're the only non-Latin American on this table. So I guess you have a more detached view.
So just to conclude, I think one thing that is very, very important, we cannot develop an anti-urban tendency. I think we cannot forget. I think Solano, I think you were right in a sense, but I think we have to look to the city and to the metropolis, South American metropolis, and all that richness, of course, those problems. And I think what is Eve? Is she still here? No, I think what Eve said is very important, because I think our task is to complexify concepts. And she said something interesting about the difference between periphery and province. And this is very, very important. I have a good friend, a sociologist in Brazil, who talks about the centrality of the periphery. And this is very, very important. And this is to approach the theme of a contemporary urban subjectivity. And this is new. And our task as architects, as planners, and I think this is like to answer to Correa's question, whatever happened to urbanism, I think we have to give an answer to that question. We have to face it, because we cannot only remain concerned about preservation. Preservation is one step. That's my feeling. And that's one thing I am taking back with me with Brazil, that task. What kind of imagination, contemporary imagination, can we, as architects, and in our studios, in our universities, and so on? That's it.
Wonderful. I think that's the goal of SAP, so that's perfect.
Right, it's very well summarized. But I think we should, in a way, Mason and
two quick points to each one of the, I guess, new issues that were tabled just in this last panel. And I guess this question of scales, I think, was raised, Flavio. And I'm thinking here, I don't remember actually whose presentation, I've just been letting a lot of them wash over me, but this question of cartographic violence, whose presentation was that?
Santiago.
Santiago's. And I don't think there is such a thing as non-violent cartographic drawing, just to say. And I think that it problematizes the very issue of integration, and I think that's what the SAP project I see as being very fresh or original as a launching of the project here, is that it's asking the question not of what does design look like, or even maybe the often counter-response to that of what does design do. Neither one of those, but more questions of what are the methodologies or models really of integration. And I think to try to find a way to represent models of integration is a far more interesting problem to me than what does the building look like or what does the urban form of it. So I'm thinking of maybe, again, the 60s, 70s interest in systems thinking is an unfinished project, and maybe something that integration and infrastructure could pick up and continue with fresh thinking, especially given that the difference between the Corbusian model of collaboration with engineer is that a problem and an opportunity today is that we are overwhelmed with information. Just in doing research for this, in an instant, we can find out what percentage of Venezuela's energy was through hydroelectric. I mean, that would have taken weeks and complex number of phone calls and faxes, whatever it might have been. So the fact that the problem of how to manage information availability for a designer, what is the role of the architect, is ultimately one very complex issue, is to manage that, to know when to modulate it or to turn off information and to edit it, to refine, to be selective about information. Very complicated. I think the students here probably are also reflecting upon that in their design work, is how to manage that information overflow. And then the question of models of integration, I think it's a fascinating, I look forward to the 3 years to see that being a result, to see these different reflections from the different communities and different designers.
Very good.
Thank you.
Rodrigo, briefly, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Showed lots of violent cartographies.
First of all, a thought about the network, this network, that is being originated through this symposium, and a plea for some kind of methodological proposition as to how to proceed from now on. For example, if to proceed between two schools, if to take up a certain access and to work at both ends, or how to do it, such as to be able to continue with this task. I think this is a powerful network. I think in political terms, the prestige of Harvard University and the universities involved is important, and I think can make probably some difference at some level if the projects have the support of institutions of this kind. Also, I think this event is a product of modern connectivity. If we're really honest about it, we all took planes, we drove highways, we went to harbors, and we are here. So I also learned about the IIRSA initiative not very long ago, but I'd never realized that the interoceanic systems, corridors that were planned in the southern cone were inscribed within a much broader kind of frame. But for us, the connectivity with Buenos Aires, for example, has always been very important. And it is established in the early 20th century through the railway. So it's not just the Brazilians as the bad guys who are trying to push up their products to the Pacific and to China. I think there is an element in this project which is genuine, which is very positive, culturally, I mean, as well as economically, and which is to do with establishing links. Healthy cultures, wherever Aboriginal or metropolitan, are usually linked to other cultures. That's, I think, is a healthy cultural mode. Isolation, in a sense, breeds also some kind of decadence. So there is a positive side about all this. There is a question of infrastructure. It is easier to see it in hindsight. If we look at a very orthodox view of infrastructure, I think we can all distinguish between pieces of infrastructure that made history, that made landscapes, that created places, that created modes of perception of places as well in a very positive way, and there are other pieces of infrastructure that were a disaster, negative in their consequences, and meaningless culturally. So, of course, the task is to produce things which would be meaningful. And I think the presence of the engineer in that context is effectively very, very important, because these projects, in Chile, for example, these projects are channeled through the Ministry of Public Works, and the Ministry of Public Works is a Ministry of Engineers with a very, very small architectural department. That's the reality of it. I think we have talked about scale. Scale is a concept. There is not such a thing as scale in nature. Scale is embedded. Every scale is embedded in every other scale. So it is a tool. It is a concept. I think it has been very refreshing to see this kind of zooming in and out in scale throughout the conference. But I also think that the métier of the architect has got a specific scale range, which is associated to our tools, our intellectual and material tools, to our theory, and which allows us to operate competently, professionally within a certain range, which is not absolutely expansive either to a large scale, neither to a small scale. There is such a thing as the scale of the architectural project, the scale of the landscape project, and the scale of the urban project too. There is a difference between a plan and a map, and it is a conceptual difference which makes some kind of distinction between fields which are different in the nature. So I think our project is how to be useful within the scale that we really command. I think is an interesting question. If we talk about a project, you know, an intercontinental highway is not an architectural project. It exceeds the scope of the architectural project. But we could also see the intercontinental highway as a concatenation of situations which are within the realm of the architectural project. So there is great room there for acting. Finally, nature does not establish hierarchies. In that sense, it is true that there is no such a thing as a hinterland. Hinterland, hierarchically speaking, is something which is in a second-rate condition as regards the metropolitan condition, yes? But in the natural space, it's not so loaded with hierarchies. To put an example, the Atacama Desert, which Eugenio has shown, by the coast of the Atacama Desert, which you see as an absolutely barren soil, a place which is the driest on Earth. I have learned from people who are experts in botany that the soil crust in the Atacama Desert is now highly valued, almost like the value of the production of the Amazonian forest, because it is a kind of fossilized, contains a fossilized wealth of botanical material. So where I would see emptiness, someone would see plentifulness. Someone else would see plentifulness. There's not such a thing as emptiness, but it is a metaphor. The interior ocean is a metaphor as well. Of course, it was never devoid of life, that space. Certainly not devoid of human life. It is loaded with human experiences. Maybe we don't know many of those experiences, but they do exist. But then our field also moves in the realm of metaphor, and it is an art, it is a social art, but it is an art. It is a political art as well, architecture, because we deal with the public, very strongly so. But I think we also move somewhere between science and poetry, and it is perhaps because of that, because of task of gathering together things from different fields, that we can sit comfortably and usefully between our disciplines that deal with problems at different scales.
Very good. I think with that, we can actually open maybe to the audience for a few. Oh, Marcelo, sorry.
I really don't know what to say, what not to say. But I think two things I want to share with you. During these 2 days, I have the same sensation that most of the panelists about the presentations that are not perhaps having the look in the future. Perhaps is because now is the first meeting, and we are thinking about IIRSA and about areas of research. But I think that it's very important to think in the future and to think in the project. If Ana Maria said Brazil thinks big, and I think that Uruguayan thinks small. So that I'm sure of that. I'm proud of that, and also say that Brazilians are condemned to modernism. I think that Uruguayan are condemned to pragmatism, and I think that some pragmatism is very important when you are thinking in the future. Perhaps hearing some of the presentations, we imagine a future without planes, without cars, without the city we love to visit, to live. I think that first of all we must omit a double ethic, or I don't know how to say. But when we talk in universities, all seems to needed to be green in the future. Perhaps the only thing that's matter is to conserve. I agree totally that we must think in the future, we must project the future and project the changes. The world is always changing. That's something that we can be all, we can all agree. I was reading when I came here, one magazine of the Plot magazine, number 4. I think that it was an article of Spanish architect Andrés Jaque, and he said something that I will read in Spanish. Perhaps somebody can translate perfect, because I think it's a very a concept very important. He said that the architecture now or in the future must pass from de la ética del enunciado a la ética de las consecuencias. How can I translate that?
From the ethics of enunciation to the ethics of consequence.
Denunciation.
Okay.
From the ethics of denunciation to the ethics of consequences.
De los enunciados. Enunciados.
Enunciation.
Enunciation.
Modern architecture thing in the enunciation.
Statement.
Statement.
A statement.
Doesn't
Okay.
exist in
What I mean, what we do or what we not do have a consequence.
I'm sorry.
What we do or what we not do have consequence. Even if we do nothing, the consequence will be terrific. So it's not the problem about looking what the people do and say criticize with intellectual, fantastic universities what the people do. The problem is to think how to interact. I like what say Camilo about the energy and how to some little vectors can take the energy to another place. That's the problem. What we do with those energy, that I think there is a lot of energy. Latin America have a lot of energy. You send some mails and you are all here and we are all thinking and we are all making a lot. But we must think the future, not only saying, no, please don't construct ways, no construct port. No, we must think the future, imagine where we want to go. I think that's very important because because of that pragmatism, perhaps, or perhaps because of our age, I don't have more heroes, and it's a pity, but it's true. And I know that what we must do now is with the effort to think in what we can do. And that's the process, that's what Graciela said, that's the boat this boat, it's like a caleuche, like a nave de los locos, no? Like, so, but we must think in the future, we must think in the possibilities, real possibilities. I like presenting. Sí. That's because, for example, I show what is happening in Talca, in the School of Architecture of Talca, because it's absolutely pragmatic, an answer to what is happening in that place. I know it's nobody thinks the same, but I think that that's the main thing.
I guess we can open up the discussion to the audience. Are there any questions?
Are there any questions?
Anita.
Over here? Anita.
Anita, Jorge
Martin.
So I guess I'm going to make a plea for the SAP project to really be about South America. And here I am being very regionalist, continental, I mean, in the traditional way, because nobody is talking and nobody has mentioned the huge tragedy of South America in terms of the enormous poverty that is there, because all of these networks have always gone to serve external interests. And one can easily read the IIRSA lines. We say, how nice to integrate South America. Of course it is nice, because it has been always very divided, and we have always blamed geography. So now that's not a barrier anymore. But in fact, is it to integrate closer to Asia? And is that really what's going to happen? Are these huge contracts going to go to companies from Korea and from China, wherever, to build these projects? Once again, removing the potential for employment and for engagement of the South American people. And I think we have here to address issues. Of course, the architect's project is to propose, to be creative, to generate. I don't see that necessarily as going against what you call preservation, of course not, but I think it needs to be instrumentalized to create a new South America itself. We've been wanting this. It used to be 100 years of solitude. We're into the 200 years of solitude. And we can ourselves continue to do that damage. And so we really need to turn over the cultivation of a South American sensibility, subjectivity, of course, a sense of territory, of regionalism that is finally landed in South America.
I think that's a very important point, and I don't think Felipe nor Victor nor any of us can emphasize enough that SAP is not about finding culprits. So if it sounded like I'm pointing fingers at the Brazilian, I'm apologizing, not at all. I was just excited to find the root of this mechanism that's being deployed, because it is being questioned. And it's not about opposing the integration through infrastructure nor interconnectivity. Is about redefining it in terms that do not only serve the interests of extraction. And I think, Anita, you
Which in a way, I think the idea that we've actually framed it within South America, but also framed it not really as IIRSA, but IIRSA as an excuse to rethink the byproducts and the caveats of IIRSA, which is exactly that relationship between sort of who it's basically the over-infrastructuralization, right, of this landscape and a complete under-urbanization that results from that process. Jorge.
Well, I was not going to go back to something that has already been discussed. I thought Flavio and Graciela were very eloquent about that, but I think Mason, in his rebuttal, put it back, and I need to now reply. It's not about, I think the way Felipe put it, maybe it was a little bit light, but it's not about what it looks like. Or if it is about what it looks like, it is about what it's implied by that. It's about not only the the efficiency and the professional authority and responsibility that any project assumes. We are even past that now. We are asking more from architects. It's about also the dignity a project provides, to the people, particularly the type of people that we have been looking, in extenso. That is going to be affected by these projects. I'm surprised you went that way, because you were the presentation that got that close. You even say you were talking about border stations. You showed 20 pictures of it, and you said, please notice that how terrible the architecture and the building is and have nothing to offer. And then that's not what you want to do. You want to deal with methodology. I'm not questioning that you should deal with methodology or not, but we are left wanting to really see how, because it is going to be, in the end, that what is going to prove whether we are in the right track or not. It's not about what it looks like. It's about how a building in a particular condition with particular ecological situation meets the ground. But it's also about people. It's about how open or closed it is, how a border station works in terms of immigrants trying to pass from one country to the other that is in conflict. What is the architecture do to that? It's true, architecture doesn't do everything, but it does a lot. It does a lot in terms, again, of how dignified a person is treated by the building and by what a building can do. So, I'm not asking for those that do not want to do it, but I would expect that to see architects. I wanted to see, I know the work of Solano. I knew him. I discovered him through this building before I met him. I want to see his response to that as an architect and not to have a lesson of anthropology, which is okay, but you know, we are not the best at that. We are better, I mean, he's better as an architect, which is not to say that his lecture was not nice and simpatica, but I'm saying, you know, I am left with this kind of problem, and you know, it's very simple. We might say, let's just concentrate on methodology and all that, but if you don't do it, you know, IIRSA is going to assign all those border stations and the harbors and the hotels and all that to Santiago Calatrava, for instance. No, I mean, I'm saying, is either that or not? I mean, either we have a position that is a little bit more coherent, that is critical, but also assume what we do. And so I want to see plans, sections, and elevation.
Right.
In 2 years, you'll have it all.
And I recommend, no, I think, you know, there is a project here, and because actually we did it once with Elemental, I think SAP should organize a competition with projects.
But I think in a way, but Jorge, in a way, that's what I mean by what it looks like is exactly that. I mean, it's when does it become sort of a road becomes a line becomes a sort of significant when you know the dimension of the road.
You know, it's interesting that, you know, we've seen this road. This road, we have not seen it, but we've seen the line, you know, Santos, Antofagasta, we've seen all of it, but we actually have not seen the road. And nobody, you know, with all the imagination that I think, you know, rightly Octavio is asking for, nobody has dared to imagine, well, you know, we are all thinking about a highway. Well, this is not going to be for tourists going from Santos to take a bath in Antofagasta. This is about
Cargo.
stuff,
It's purely cargo.
heavy stuff. So maybe it's not about cars. So how do we design a really healthy, good, environmentally good conveyor of goods
Absolutely.
from one coast to the other without, so I mean, that's a project. That's a project that I would have liked to see.
No, I guess
but
in
I think
terms of
Mason.
methodology.
Just a real
I think
quick,
Mason should respond.
quick
to
micro rebuttal to Jorge's comment, and I promise I will be very brief. Is that I completely agree. I am dying to know what this thing looks like as well. But if the project began in a conventional way of saying, here's the brief, please design a border station, I don't think it would yield as interesting, let's say, an opportunity as maybe the luxury of this time as a mid-review almost. Anyway,
I think we do need to clarify a little bit the methodology that SAP is proposing, because we fully agree, you agree, we all agree. But basically,
But you would agree that we leave with a little bit of a blank that has not been
absolutely. Oh, it was expected already. Maybe we should have started by explaining a little bit the long-term goals.
What we need to get today, because in terms of really architectural solutions,
Wanting.
even though it's great, but you know, it's Amancio Williams, it's Corbusier, it's Costa.
What's next?
So I'm saying, you know, it's a little bit frustrating.
I agree. I think that maybe that's an omission that Felipe and I unintentionally made, but I guess that we maybe should have started by explaining that our goal, we did discuss the possibility of a competition. Jorge, Elemental has inspired this to a large extent. And but the reason why we chose a network versus a competition, which could be something that happens as a network actually, is because it's gigantic. Elemental is a housing project, and it was easier to handle. But what we are proposing, all these incredible professionals, is that when they go back to their country in terms of methodology, they start their own hubs, which have to be transdisciplinary, and that addresses your question, which have to be interinstitutional, which addresses your question, which means that if the Universidad Católica de Chile wants to work with the Católica de Quito and with Harvard, they're more than welcome to. Some links have already been established spontaneously, for example, between Toronto and Medellin, which is fabulous. But many more links are expected to happen in the future. And the idea is that in the span of 4 semesters, 1 semester of research, 2 of projecting, we will have results that we hope, if we get the funding and the necessary support.
Right. No, but I think, yeah.
That in 2 years we'll have an exhibition, a publication,
Right.
and a dissemination strategy. Yes, yes.
Oh.
This is this first sub project is a 2-year project. So I guess that in the symposium that is going to happen in 2013, we will see plans, sections, elevations,
Right.
axonometrics, all sorts of nice renders and everything. Yeah.
No, but I think that's true, and I think it's I think it's important to reiterate that, because in a way, I think part of the sessions that we've had today have had to do with establishing these kind of discussions that can begin to frame a project. And I think it's impossible to have a project a priori without being fueled by this critique, right? I think that this critique in many ways has set up sort of a framework for a particular site. And I did expect, by the way, for the sort of, in a way, for the projective part to not sort of live up to the larger historical overview, but I think that there's a challenge in the projective that is what the task of a SAP is, and I think cannot be sort of underplayed that easily.
Only a thing, I think it's not a problem of objects. I think that if we project objects, we are in a wrong way. It's a problem of thinking, on how we think. Because if now we all go home thinking we must project objects, we are in a wrong way. I'm sure of that. It's not a problem of objects. It's a problem on how to think. And I like to ask a question now to Ana and Felipe. Why the hubs of this network of SAP are the same that the hubs of the IIRSA? Perhaps the first thing we must do is to break those hubs.
Right, of course, but that's
another way to to approach.
Absolutely, but that's I think a very important issue, which is, and we've mentioned it several times, I think in discussions, but the map that we've showed, I think, has permeated that, which is that it's purely an administrative and an organizational structure, right, for other forms of exchange to begin to happen. And I think a lot of those exchanges, as Ana Maria pointed out, are beginning to happen, right? You're from Uruguay, but you're more interested in working with Talca, right? And I think that kind of dialogue is something that initial map can actually begin to...
And another thing that is very important to clarify is that this is an open research network, and what it means is that it's not our intention in any way to control the methodology, nor to control the outcomes, nor to tell whether it should be process, object, infrastructure, whether you should work with it. No, it's like each person. I mean, I think what Ottavio said is key. This is about imagination, the contemporary subjectivity, and projecting. We want creative individuals, and we think they all are, who design their own processes, their own responses to something that, as Anita said, is going to happen whether we participate or not. Our goal, because we have been excluded from this process, is to be able in 2 years to have very specific proposals, whether they're objects or not. And be able to present them to the presidents of South America through UNASUR and say, look, this is what you're proposing. This is what we
you
should do. Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly. And I think...
But we don't want to control it in any way.
So I think that with that, I think we unfortunately need to move on. I think Raul needs to, wants to give his closing remarks. And so maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more questions. Martin, and then we have a lot of questions.
We have Angelo,
Martin and Angelo.
Camilo,
and
we have Felipe, we have Solano.
Martin, then Angelo? No. And then we'll...
Let's go Martin, Angelo, Camilo,
Okay,
Felipe.
I think I'll introduce a bifurcation in what we were discussing. That many of today's presentations showed images of romantic landscapes, very romanticized landscapes. And depicting all that kind of, well, the rivers, even the blurry backgrounds and all that kind of very, very romantic ideal. The observer placed, of course, outside the landscape and a kind of untouched nature and completely idealized idea of the territory. Then we added, for example, Camilo's laboratory in the rainforest. But the landscape remained romantic. And apparently there's a point in which it ceases to be romantic and it probably becomes infrastructural. And that's probably the point in which it's represented or mapped or made into a cartography, and that transforms that romanticism into something that is stable and materialized and like dense and heavy in the landscape. But then I think that there was an interesting turning point in the presentations, and it was when Luis and Mason introduced that diagram of the epigenetic landscape, which I think it's a very beautiful intersection or depiction of an idea that it's inherently complex, that notion of mutation, of resilience, and that kind of infra-landscape, and then that sort of very flexible and molded surface. And I think that that diagram precisely articulates a very complex idea that what we could associate with a infrastructural territory, or with a kind of complex territory, with something that is still poetic and romantic in that surface. And I was thinking that ultimately we'll probably have to deal with this idea, or with this or probably some of the goals of we here is that we will have to produce or to extract some poetics or some romanticism out of this infrastructural question, to turn it into what I was saying yesterday, like a kind of system of communication, or a meaningful system, or a signifying system. And it occurred to me that epigenetic landscape and in its kind of romantic and complex intersection builds a kind of a portmanteau territory, a kind of complex intersection. And back to Mr. Fuller, he was a specialist in developing portmanteau words, which are words that are the result of combining two words. And probably that kind of landscape or infrastructural landscape that we have to think is that kind of portmanteau territory, or portmanteau space in general.
Just to quickly...
I want to say only a thing, because it's especially to answer this, or not to answer, to comment this. Of course, infrastructure is romantic. If you think that the sublime is attached to the big infrastructures of 19th century, think in Turner, in John Martin, etc. So, and the idea of nature, the idea of green, the idea of change, this is romantic, of course, against the compartmentalization and mechanical, well, from the Enlightenment point of view, that is also with us now. We have to be aware of this, because if not, we are going back in history if we don't recognize the roots we have already walk.
And I think that part of that romanticism that we expect from SAP is the journey. I think that one common trait of all of you is this, I mean, the journey down the river, the journey through the land. All of you guys showed images, and I think that the starting point for all of us in the research and documentation.
Diagrams of weather we are talking with Jorge, isothermas and isobars, they are an invent of Humboldt. They are the real weather diagrams.
There's been so much discussion about what is infrastructure and definition, and we go back and forth, and I didn't want to talk about it. But now you mentioned the fantastic idea, no, but you know.
Oh, I am romantic.
Also brought today a caricature of Karl Marx, and I was just thinking, you know, in this country we don't talk about Karl Marx anymore. It's just a bad word. It's, you know, there's a total repression.
But Hayden White put again over the.
To go back to the first person that philosophically uses the word infrastructure, because he talks about that in relation to the ideological superstructure and the base, which is economic, which is the means of production and all that. And if we really go back to those philosophical definitions, we could really understand what's going on with the infrastructure today in these societies in which you are undermining an ideological superstructure that these people have had as a culture. And it is understanding that dynamic between the two, which is pure Marxism 101, as we would say in America. And you can read and the continuous thing and the discussion of Althusser about all of that. And it is really something we should consider, because it will save us a lot of time, that clarification. Yeah. That's all.
Very good. But I think,
it's nice.
I think actually with that comment, I know that there's still a lot of questions, but I'm actually going to suggest that we perhaps close this session. I'm going to ask Raul to sort of give the closing remarks, and then there's a reception sponsored by the Loeb Fellowship, who's also been a very generous sponsor of this event, and we can continue this discussion informally there. So thank you very much. Raul, please.